I still vividly remember Blake's face as he knelt before me, tears streaming, begging me for shelter. That look, the look of a man who once had everything and now had nothing. The man Stanford once regarded with such awe, who had destroyed my academic career and nearly cost me my life, now trembled in a tattered coat at the door of my small Boston apartment. Can you imagine? I looked at the big shot of the prestigious Phoenix Society, son of one of Silicon Valley's most powerful tech moguls, crying and begging me, a guy once deemed a pathetic loser, for help. Fate certainly has a twisted sense of humor. But to understand how we got to this point, we need to go back 3 years. When I, Ethan Miller, was just an ordinary sophomore trying to survive at one of America's most elite universities. I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth like most Stanford students. My parents were both high school teachers in a small town in Oregon. They'd saved their whole lives so I could have a better future than they did. I got into Stanford on a computer science scholarship and worked part-time in the AI lab to cover other expenses. My phone had a cracked screen. My clothes were all from thrift stores. And my most luxurious meal was instant ramen mixed with a hard-boiled egg when I had a little extra cash. Everything was normal until I unexpectedly received an invitation from Professor Harrington to join a cutting-edge AI research project for outstanding students. This was the opportunity hundreds of students dreamed of, not only bringing prestige but also opening doors to top tech corporations after graduation. I couldn't believe my luck. In the first meeting, I met Blake Westfield, son of the CEO of Westfield Technologies, one of the world's largest AI companies. It wasn't hard to recognize Blake. A Patek Philippe watch worth more than my entire 4 years of tuition, clothes always as perfect as if he'd stepped off the cover of GQ, and a Tesla Model S parked right in front of the computer science building. But what surprised me was how Blake approached me right after the meeting. "Hey, you're Ethan, right? I heard you aced algorithm analysis," Blake said, smiling friendly. "I'm kind of stuck on the big assignment, wondering if you could help me out." I agreed immediately, not just to build a connection but also because Blake seemed to genuinely need help. We started meeting regularly at the library. Friendship developed quickly as Blake proved to be very sociable, often inviting me to expensive coffee shops, treating me to meals I never dared to dream of. I was even introduced to his circle of friends, the most elite students at Stanford. "Ethan, man, you're a legit genius," Blake would often say when I explained a complex concept. "I think we're going to do great things together." When Blake invited me to a party hosted by the Phoenix Society, a secret student society for the wealthy elite that everyone dreamed of joining, I felt like I was living a dream. Blake made it clear I had to dress the part. "The invitation is for the brilliant Ethan Miller, not the cheap student meal Ethan," Blake laughed, patting my shoulder. "Don't worry. I'll send you an outfit from a friend's store. Just show up and wow everyone with that genius brain of yours." And I did. I borrowed money, worked extra hours at the lab, even sold my old computer to buy a decent suit. Blake sent me a Burberry shirt and an Hermes tie on loan. I didn't know how expensive they were until I Googled their prices. That money could have paid my rent for 2 months. The party at the Lakeside Mansion was every student's dream. Premium drinks, a famous DJ flown in from Los Angeles, and the most powerful faces of Silicon Valley. Many professors and successful alumni were also present. The Westfield family always knew how to network. At first, everything was perfect. Blake introduced me to everyone as Stanford's next computer genius. I received nods of approval, engaged in intellectual conversations, and even got a few internship offers from alumni running multi-million-dollar startups. I felt like I had truly stepped into their world. But then, as the party reached its peak, Blake, who had quite a bit to drink, started acting strangely. He pulled me into the middle of the crowd and raised his champagne glass high. "Attention, everyone," Blake shouted, his voice shrill from the alcohol. "I want to introduce you to our genius, Ethan Miller." Hundreds of eyes turned towards me. I smiled awkwardly, unsure what was happening. "Ethan here is living proof that Stanford sometimes admits people who just don't belong," Blake continued, his voice suddenly laced with sarcasm. "Look at his suit, tried his best, but still can't hide his origins. Did you know he had to sell his computer to buy this suit?" Laughter started to ripple through the crowd. I stood frozen to the spot, not understanding what was going on. "And this genius friend of mine has written all my assignments for the past semester," Blake went on, his eyes glinting with a cruel light. "He thought it would help him get accepted into our world. Pathetic, isn't it, folks?" The laughter grew louder. I felt my face burn with shame. But the most interesting part is, Blake lowered his voice as if revealing a huge secret. Our genius actually believed Professor Harrington chose him for the research project because of his talent. "Ethan, didn't you know? My father donated $5 million to the lab last year. Who would dare refuse when I suggested a friend for the research team?" The room erupted in laughter and murmurs. A few people looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up for me. It wasn't just the shame, it was the realization that everything I thought I'd achieved was a lie. Blake never considered me a friend. I was just an amusement, a tool for him to get good grades without effort. In that moment, a rage welled up inside me, a rage that had been suppressed throughout a lifetime of being looked down upon for not being born into privilege. I looked Blake straight in the eye, trying to keep my voice from trembling. At least I can earn my place on my own, I said, my voice echoing in the suddenly silent space. What about you, Blake? What can you do without your father's money? You don't even understand the most basic concepts in your own major. The smile vanished from Blake's face. His eyes turned cold. You always needed me to explain every line of code, every algorithm. I continued, too angry to stop. If it weren't for me and other scholarship students doing your work, the great heir of Westfield Technologies wouldn't even graduate. A few murmurs started to spread through the crowd. I saw some professors exchange worried glances, but I didn't care anymore. The truth needed to be said. And all of you, I turned to the crowd, go ahead and laugh. Laugh at the guy who wasn't born with millions in his bank account. But remember that when you need someone to actually solve problems, to build the technologies your father's companies depend on, it's people like me who will do it, not those who only know how to spend money and boast about things they never had to work for. Silence enveloped the room. Blake looked at me like he'd just been slapped. But then, a slight smile appeared on his lips, a smile that sent a chill down my spine. Very sentimental, Ethan, Blake said softly. But you forgot one thing. This is my world, not yours. And you just made the biggest mistake of your life. With those words, Blake turned away, signaling security. Two large men approached. Escort our guest out, Blake ordered. And make sure he's never invited to any Phoenix event again. I was dragged out like a criminal, under the gaze of professors, friends, and people I hoped could be future employers. Thrown out onto the street, I didn't even realize Blake had kept the loaner shirt and tie. They were worth more than everything I owned. Standing alone in the cold California night, I had no idea this was just the beginning of the nightmare. That Blake Westfield didn't just want to embarrass me. He wanted to destroy my life. And the worst part was, he had the power to do it. I walked back to the dorm in a daze. Shame and anger intertwined, creating an emotional storm that made it hard to breathe. But I still hadn't realized this was just the first step in Blake's revenge. Just 2 days after the party, I received an email from Professor Harrington informing me that I was suspended from the research project for academic ethical violations, a completely baseless accusation. I immediately went to the professor's office to explain, but instead of Harrington, I found 2 campus security officers waiting for me. You're not allowed to approach Professor Harrington anymore. One of them said, we've received a report of threatening behavior. I was stunned. Threatening behavior? I've never threatened anyone. But they wouldn't listen. I was escorted out of the building and warned that if I persisted, I would be suspended from my studies. In the following days, things got worse at an alarming rate. The computer science department announced they were investigating my submissions for suspected plagiarism. Every professor suddenly became cold. Classmates avoided me. Rumors spread like wildfire that I had stolen code, that I had hacked into the school's system to change grades, that I had threatened other students to do my assignments for me. Every accusation was the complete opposite of the truth. I knew who was behind all this. But how could a scholarship student like me fight against the son of a tech billionaire? 2 weeks after that fateful party, I received an official notice from the dean's office. I was suspended from studies for serious violation of Stanford's honor code and was awaiting a hearing that could lead to expulsion. I called my parents, trying to explain the situation without worrying them too much. My father, a man who always believed in justice and the system, insisted the truth would prevail. My mother, more pragmatic, quietly asked if we should hire a lawyer, an expense my family couldn't possibly afford. I decided to fight. I gathered all my assignments, every line of code I'd ever written, every email exchange with professors and colleagues. I went to the university's ombuds office, a unit designed to help students in situations like mine. The head of the office, a middle-aged woman named Dr. Grayson, listened to my story with an increasingly grave expression. Ethan, she said after I finished, I want to help you. But you need to understand what we're up against. The Westfield family doesn't just donate millions to the university. They're one of the biggest benefactors of the AI research program. They have deep influence with the board of trustees. But they can't expel me without evidence, I protested. I can prove I'm innocent. Dr. Grayson sighed. You don't get it, Ethan. In cases like these, justice is often defined by whoever has more power. Nevertheless, she helped me draft an appeal and prepare for the hearing. During that time, I felt like I was being watched. A black SUV was often parked outside my dorm. My email was hacked. My phone constantly received calls from unknown numbers. The hearing was a public charade. The panel consisted of 3 pre-selected professors and 2 students. I presented my evidence, trying to remain calm and rational. But when Blake walked in with his private lawyer and proof that I had stolen his research, I knew the outcome had already been decided. Ethan Miller has deceived us all, Blake said. His voice perfectly pitched to sound genuinely hurt. I trusted him, helped him integrate, and this is how he repays me, by stealing my work and then threatening me when caught. Blake presented cleverly edited emails, doctored audio recordings, and even testimonies from other students, people I was sure had been promised all sorts of things to lie. When I looked into their eyes, I saw no remorse, All I saw was fear and the hope that this would land them a dream internship at Westfield Technologies. 3 days later, the decision came. I was expelled from Stanford for a serious violation of the honor code. Not only that, but my academic record would forever bear the mark of this incident, making it nearly impossible to transfer to another reputable school. I packed my belongings numbly. 3 years of hard work, sleepless nights coding, dreams of a future in tech, all gone up in smoke. As I was carrying my bags out of the dorm, I received a text from an unknown number. Don't think this is the end. This is just the first lesson. I knew it was Blake, but I no longer had the energy to care. I had lost everything, or so I thought. Until I got home to Oregon and discovered that both my parents had been abruptly fired from the high school where they had taught for 20 years. The official reason was budget restructuring. But my father heard from a colleague that a major grant to the school had been withdrawn at the last minute, a grant from a charitable foundation linked to the Westfield Foundation. The anger and despair in me transformed into something else, a cold, sharp resolve. If Blake thought I would surrender, he was sorely mistaken. I might have lost Stanford, but I still had my brain. And more importantly, I had nothing left to lose. Over the next few months, I worked various temp jobs, waiting tables, delivering packages, even working night security at a local warehouse to help my family with expenses. But every spare moment was dedicated to my plan. I wasn't going to attack Blake directly. That would be an uneven fight. Instead, I targeted what his family valued most, their tech empire. Westfield Technologies was known for its massive database of user behavior, something they collected through various apps and services. This was their real source of power, used to train advanced AI algorithms. I knew this because Blake had bragged about it multiple times when we were still friends. He even revealed how they collected data from users without explicit consent, a clear violation of many privacy regulations. I began to delve deep into Westfield Technologies. I spent hours reading public financial reports, following company-related news, and learning about their business partners. I joined anonymous tech forums where tech employees often shared insider information. And gradually, a clearer picture of Westfield Technologies' operations began to emerge. It wasn't just about illicit data collection. Westfield was violating a slew of security regulations, evading taxes through offshore shell companies, and even selling data to governments with histories of human rights abuses. But I needed concrete proof, not just internet rumors. Fortunately, I had an unexpected advantage: the invisibility of a temp worker. I applied for a janitorial position with a service company contracted by Westfield Technologies at their Seattle office. Humble and unassuming, I became invisible to people like Blake and his family. They never looked twice at the floor cleaner. They never worried about what they said when a manual laborer was in the room. All the better for my plan. For 6 months, I gathered information. A discarded note here, an overheard conversation there. I began to paint a picture of what Westfield Technologies was really doing. I photographed documents, recorded meetings they didn't think anyone was listening to. Once, I even managed to plant a small device in the main conference room when I was assigned to change a light bulb, a job too menial for their IT team. The process was slow and dangerous. But after 6 months, I had enough evidence to shake Westfield Technologies to its core. Specifically, I found internal emails discussing Project Chimera, a secret effort to sell advanced facial recognition algorithms to authoritarian governments, who would use them to track and suppress dissidents. I also discovered that Blake didn't just know about this operation. He was directly managing it as part of his internship at the family company. That's why he needed good grades at Stanford without serious study. He already had a guaranteed job after graduation, managing an ethically and legally dubious project. Once I had enough evidence, I contacted a distant cousin of mine, Tyler, who worked in an anti-fraud unit at the FDA. He didn't have direct jurisdiction over tech cases, but he knew people who did. Tyler connected me with an FBI agent specializing in high-tech crime. "Do you understand what you're doing?" Tyler asked when we met at a coffee shop in Portland. Westfield isn't just a tech company. They have connections to politicians, judges, even law enforcement agencies. "Are you sure you want to pursue this?" "They took everything from me," I replied. "I have nothing left to lose." The FBI agent, a woman named Camila Reyes with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, reviewed my evidence in silence. Finally, she looked up. "I've been watching Westfield Technologies for a while," she said, "but I've never had enough to secure a search warrant. This," she pointed to my documents, "could change things." The investigation lasted months. During that time, I moved to Boston and started attending a smaller university under a new name, Nathan Evans. Not the kind of school a former Stanford student would normally attend, but it was the only place that accepted me with an expelled record. I maintained contact with Agent Reyes, providing more information when needed, but mostly, I tried to rebuild my life. A year after I submitted the evidence, on a rainy Tuesday morning, the FBI simultaneously raided Westfield Technologies' offices across the United States. Servers were seized. Senior executives were taken in for questioning. The stock market reacted violently as Westfield shares plummeted. And on every news channel, the face of Richard Westfield, Blake's father, appeared with the headline. Top tech CEO accused of fraud, industrial espionage, and privacy violations. Blake wasn't mentioned in the initial reports, but I knew his time would come. I had ensured his involvement in Project Chimera was specifically highlighted in the documents I gave the FBI. The investigation expanded rapidly. Federal prosecutors uncovered more violations than I had even known about. Westfield Technologies had breached almost every data security regulation, evaded hundreds of millions in taxes through offshore shell companies, and even bribed officials to secure government contracts. 2 months after the raid, Blake finally made the news, arrested at Boston Logan Airport trying to flee the country. He was charged with conspiracy, destruction of evidence, and obstruction of justice. Reports said he had tried to remotely wipe data and warn foreign partners about the investigation. I watched all of this from afar with a cold satisfaction. Agent Reyes kept her promise not to reveal her source, so I remained anonymous throughout the whole affair. To the world, this was just a typical case of corporate greed exposed. To me, it was justice. As the legal proceedings advanced, the Westfield empire began to crumble. Shares became worthless. Assets were frozen. Business partners fled. Richard Westfield never actually served prison time. People like him rarely faced the full consequences of their actions, but he was forced to resign, pay hundreds of millions in fines, and received a suspended sentence. His career and reputation were finished. Blake wasn't so lucky. Without his father's influence to protect him, and with prosecutors needing a win to appease an angry public, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. I'm not one to revel in others' suffering, but I couldn't help but feel a deep satisfaction seeing the man who destroyed my future finally face consequences. But what I didn't anticipate was how things would continue to unfold. 3 years after the Westfield scandal, I had graduated from the small university in Boston with a computer science degree. Not Stanford, but still a good education. I found a job at a rising AI startup, where I quickly advanced thanks to skills Stanford hadn't been able to erase. I even invented a new natural language processing algorithm that helped my company land a major contract with an online retailer. Life wasn't perfect, but I was rebuilding it, piece by piece. My parents also found new jobs, teaching at a private school in Washington with better pay. They never knew about my role in Westfield's downfall. I kept that to myself. A secret I carried as I went to work each day, trying to forget what happened at Stanford. But the past has its own way of finding us. One rainy autumn evening in 2024, there was a knock on my apartment door. I wasn't expecting guests and cautiously opened it. It was Blake Westfield. 3 years in prison had changed him significantly. Gone was the polished look of a wealthy heir. Blake was gaunt and pale, with haunted eyes and a scruffy beard. His old, tattered coat wasn't enough to protect him from Boston's biting cold rain. "Ethan," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I know it's you." I froze. No one at my new company knew about my past at Stanford or my real name. No one except Agent Reyes knew about my role in the Westfield case. How had Blake found me? "I don't know who you're talking about," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "My name is Nathan." Blake gave a weak smile. "You changed your name, but you didn't change your algorithm. I recognized your coding style in your company's new product. No one codes that way except Ethan Miller." I was stunned. Blake had always been smart, however lazy he might have been at Stanford. The fact that he recognized my programming style after all these years caught me off guard. "You did it, didn't you?" Blake asked, his voice devoid of anger, just tired. "You were the one who gave the evidence to the FBI. You were the one who destroyed my family." I didn't answer. There was no need. We both knew the truth. "I'm not here to threaten or retaliate," Blake said. "I have nothing left to do those things with. I have nowhere else to go." He told me that after his release, no member of the Westfield family wanted anything to do with him. His mother had filed for divorce from his father shortly after the scandal and moved to Switzerland with her new husband. His father had lost everything in civil lawsuits and was living in seclusion in a small house in Florida, refusing to see his son. Old friends, they disappeared with the money. "I've been sleeping in my car for the past 3 weeks," Blake admitted. "It got towed yesterday for illegal parking. I don't have the money to get it back." "I don't." His voice choked. "I have nowhere to go." I said nothing for a long moment. Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face, to let him taste what he had done to me. But another part, the part that had learned something about compassion from my own suffering, saw a broken man. "How did you know I lived here?" I asked, still not inviting him in. "I looked for you," Blake admitted. "When I recognized that algorithm, I did some research on Nathan Evans. I needed to know if it was you. I needed to know who did that to my family." "Your family did that to themselves," I replied. "I just made sure the truth came out." Blake nodded, looking 10 years older. I know that now. In prison, I had a lot of time to think about everything my father taught me, everything I believed." He looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "I was wrong, Ethan. About everything. And I'm sorry for what I did to you at Stanford. I truly am. I didn't know if I believed the apology. But one thing I did know. I didn't want to become the Blake of old, someone willing to destroy others just because he could. "You can stay on the sofa for one night," I said finally, opening the door wider. "And only one night." Blake nearly collapsed with relief. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you. That night, as Blake slept on my old sofa, I lay awake in bed, thinking about life's strange twists. How had my worst enemy ended up under my roof, completely dependent on my kindness? How had I, a scholarship student once expelled from Stanford, become the one holding the power in this situation? 1 week turned into 2, then a month. Every day, Blake said he would leave soon, but we both knew he had nowhere to go. I helped him find a job at a local coffee shop, not what a Stanford graduate once dreamed of, but it was a start. He worked hard, didn't complain, and contributed to the rent when he could. About the pressure to succeed at any cost. About the fear of never being good enough. My father never once said, "I'm proud of you," Blake admitted one night. Not once. The best I ever got was not bad, when I got into Stanford. And when I struggled with courses, he didn't offer help. He threatened to cut funding to the school if I didn't get A's. So you came to me, I said, understanding. Yes. And when you actually helped me understand things, when you treated me like a normal person and not Richard Westfield's son, I got scared. Scared that if my father found out I needed help from a scholarship kid, he'd look down on me even more. So I turned that fear into cruelty at that party. I said nothing for a moment. Then I said, my family didn't have much money, but they always told me they were proud of me. My dad hung all my certificates in the living room. Even if they were just small awards from local coding competitions. When I got into Stanford, they threw a party with all the neighbors. Not because the scholarship would save them money, but simply because they were genuinely happy for me. Blake looked at me with a sad expression. You know, I think you were much richer than I ever was. Over time, we learned to coexist. It wasn't friendship, not exactly, but a kind of mutual understanding. Blake had changed, not just his appearance, but his essence. No longer the arrogant jerk who looked down on those without his privileges. 3 years in prison and losing everything had taught him lessons money couldn't buy. But deep wounds remained. Sometimes, I'd catch him staring into space, clearly reliving dark memories. He told me about being abused in prison, about the fear and loneliness, about how no one in his family visited him even once. You know what the worst part is? He asked me once. It's not losing the money or status. It's realizing you were never really loved. That to your family, you were just another asset. And when you lost your value, they discarded you. On my 28th birthday, 6 months after Blake showed up at my door, he gave me a gift. A refurbished old laptop. I worked extra evening shifts at the coffee shop, he explained, looking embarrassed. I know it's not comparable to the MacBook I used to have, but I installed the latest development suite for you. I know your current laptop has trouble running big projects. I looked at Blake, not knowing what to say. This wasn't the act of someone pretending to change. This was the act of someone who had truly changed. Thanks, I said finally. No, Ethan, he replied, his voice serious. Thank you. For not becoming like me. For not letting anger turn you into a cruel person. For giving me a second chance I never gave you. 2 months later, I helped Blake find a job in the IT department of a nonprofit organization. Not the kind of job someone in his former position would expect, but it was a new beginning. He moved into his own small apartment, though we still kept in touch. One Sunday afternoon, as we were having coffee at a small cafe, Blake handed me a folder. What's this? I asked. Evidence of Westfield Technologies activities that the FBI never found, he explained. About how they manipulated product reviews, how they covered up known security vulnerabilities, and the corporate clients they deceived. I kept this information as a kind of insurance while I was in prison, but now, I think I should do the right thing. I looked at Blake, noticing the determination in his eyes. Do you know this could get your father into more trouble? Blake nodded. I know, but there are companies that lost millions trusting our software. There are people who lost their jobs. They deserve to know the truth. I took the documents, feeling a strange circle closing. 3 years ago, I had reported Westfield's crimes. Now, Blake, the heir who had lost everything, was finishing the job I had started. I'll help you with this, I said, but not for revenge, because it's the right thing to do. Blake nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. We spent the next few weeks organizing the documents, verifying information, and preparing everything for Agent Reyes. This work brought us to something closer to friendship, an unlikely alliance between the former oppressor and the formerly oppressed. One evening, as we were working late in my apartment, Blake suddenly stopped, his gaze distant. You know, I still don't get it, he said softly. Why are you helping me after everything I did? I thought for a moment before answering. Maybe because I didn't want to become you, I replied. The you from back then. The person power and privilege corrupted. But I ruined your life. Not exactly. You changed its course. I corrected. And believe it or not, I think I'm stronger for it. At Stanford, I always felt like an outsider trying to prove I belonged. Now I know my worth doesn't depend on where I studied or who accepts me. Blake looked at me with undisguised admiration. You know, if I had half your confidence and principles, maybe I wouldn't have ended up like this. You can still build those, I said. It's never too late. 2 days later, we were ready. We emailed Agent Reyes and arranged to meet at a quiet coffee shop in Boston. She appeared in a simple pantsuit, still with that same serious demeanor I remembered. Mr. Miller. She nodded to me before her eyes shifted to Blake with unconcealed surprise. And, Mr. Westfield, I must say, I didn't expect to see you two together. Life is full of surprises. Blake managed a faint smile. We presented the new documents and evidence. Agent Reyes listened, occasionally taking notes and asking sharp questions. When we finished, she was silent for a long moment. This will reopen the case, she said finally, and could lead to new charges against Richard Westfield and some of the remaining executives. Are you sure you want to do this? She looked directly at Blake. I'm sure, Blake replied, his voice firmer than I'd ever heard it. I've lived too long with lies. There's one more thing. Agent Reyes turned to me. With this new evidence and Mr. Westfield's testimony, we can petition Stanford to review your case. It's possible they'll expunge the expulsion from your record. My heart beat faster. Having that stain removed from my academic record could open many closed doors. But part of me wondered if it even mattered anymore. I'll think about it, I said. As we left the coffee shop, Blake put a hand on my shoulder. You should do it, Ethan. Get back what was rightfully yours. I'm not sure it matters anymore, I admitted. I'm not the person I was 3 years ago. I don't need Stanford's validation. Blake nodded understandingly, but still said, it's not about validation. It's about fairness. 2 weeks later, the news broke. Richard Westfield and 3 other former Westfield Technologies executives faced new charges of fraud, market manipulation, and defrauding clients. The press devoured the story. But what shocked the public most was the source of the new evidence. Blake Westfield himself, Richard's son, had provided it. The articles talked about family betrayal and the Westfields' internal war. They reported on Blake's past, his time in prison, and speculated about his motives. There was only one detail they didn't have, the connection between Blake and me. Agent Reyes had kept that confidential, and we were both grateful for it. 3 days after the news broke, I received a call from the president of Stanford. His voice was polite but strained as he invited me to the university to discuss rectifying a past error. Blake encouraged me to go. This is your chance, he said. Not just to clear your record, but to close that chapter of your life. You're right, I agreed after some thought. But I'm not going alone. You're coming with me. We stood before the gates of Stanford. It felt strange to be back in a place that had once held so much promise and so much pain. The campus was as beautiful as I remembered, towering palm trees, historic stone buildings, and brilliant California sunshine. But I no longer felt the same awe or longing when I looked at it. Blake seemed even more nervous than I was. He kept tugging at his shirt collar. No longer Burberry or Hermes, just a plain shirt from a discount store. I don't think I can do this, he whispered as we walked past students who stared curiously at us. You can, I affirmed. We're not the people we were 3 years ago. President Lindstrom received us in her office. When she saw Blake beside me, her eyes widened for a fraction of a second before she quickly regained her professional composure. Mr. Miller, Mr. Westfield, she nodded. Thank you for coming. I must say, I didn't expect to see you both together. We've been hearing that a lot lately, I smiled. The meeting didn't go as I expected. There were no lengthy apologies or attempts at justification. Instead, President Lindstrom bluntly admitted that the university had made a grave error in my case. After reviewing the new evidence and the information from the FBI, it's clear that your expulsion was a serious mistake, she said. Stanford wishes to rectify that by completely expunging the expulsion from your record, granting you the bachelor's degree you would have received, and offering financial compensation for damages to your career opportunities and emotional distress. I said nothing for a moment, trying to process what was happening. Part of me wanted to scream, it's too late, that I didn't need their pity. But another part realized this wasn't about pity, it was about justice. I accept the expungement of my record and the degree, I said finally. But instead of financial compensation, I want Stanford to establish a scholarship fund for students from low-income families. People like me, who don't have a safety net if things go wrong. President Lindstrom looked surprised, but nodded in agreement. That is a very generous proposal, Mr. Miller. We will make it happen. Then, Blake suddenly spoke up. I want to add to that fund, he said, his voice trembling but firm. I don't have much money left, but I still have some small assets from a trust fund my father couldn't touch. I want to contribute all of it to this scholarship. I looked at Blake with unconcealed surprise. This was all the money he had left, his only safety net in a world that had turned its back on him. You don't have to do that, I said softly. I know, Blake replied, but I want to. I wanted to be called the Ethan Miller Scholarship Fund, so no one has to go through what you went through. Leaving Stanford that afternoon, I felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Not because I had regained the Stanford title, but because I could finally let it go. I no longer defined myself by what I had lost. Instead, I looked at what I had built from the wreckage. Blake seemed to feel similarly. As we passed the area where the fateful Phoenix party had taken place years ago, he paused for a moment, looking at the building with a distant expression. Do you have regrets? I asked. About everything you lost? About the money and privilege? No, he answered, surprising me. But I regret the lost time. The person I could have become if I hadn't been corrupted by all of it. how I treated you. He turned to look at me, but I don't regret where I am now. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm on the right path. As our plane took off from San Francisco, I looked down at the bay below and thought about the strange journey that had brought us here. From star student and wealthy heir to outcast and prisoner, and now to something between friends and allies. Fate has a way of writing stranger stories than any novel. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Blake was asleep in the seat beside me, perhaps the first peaceful sleep he'd had since his release. I took out my laptop and began to write. I still vividly remember Blake's face as he knelt before me, tears streaming, begging me for shelter. That look, the look of a man who once had everything and now had nothing. Perhaps the world needed to know this story, not to judge or praise, but to understand that people can change, that justice isn't always synonymous with revenge, and that sometimes the deepest connections can come from the most unexpected places. As I continued to type, I realized this wasn't just a story about revenge or redemption. This was a story about finding a new path from the ruins of the old one, about building something meaningful from the broken pieces. And maybe, just maybe, this new path, however imperfect and filled with unhealed wounds, was still more worth walking than the one we were supposed to have taken. Outside the airplane window, the sky stretched endlessly before me, and the future, with all its possibilities, was waiting.